Most real estate deals don't fall apart at closing. They fall apart during due diligence because something gets missed. The problem is newer investors, they either rush the process, they skip steps, or trust the wrong people, only to uncover later on that they missed something big after they close on the deal. In this episode, John and I, we're going to be breaking down our Faris Capital Partners full process on how we do our due diligence and how you can create a bulletproof system moving forward when you acquire a property. John, it's great to be here with you.
So good to be here, Mark. I just came off a little vacation, and it's always good to, reset, rewind, recharge, and did a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, a little surfing too. I won't lie. So we had some fun time in there as well. But recharge and energized, man, and ready to dive back in.
We were chatting a little bit earlier on the surfing, and it's interesting. When I was traveling, I went to Australia a number of years ago, and I actually took a lesson as well. And I realized, like, geez, no wonder why these guys on movies that are surfing are all ripped.
Yeah.
Because, like, I was like, holy geez, what a workout! Is that what you found when you were there?
Very humbling, yes,
Yeah.
for sure. After about an hour and a half, you're just like, all right, I'm done. I'm toast. Like, it's just that idea you're working out different kinds of muscles, I guess, but I have my heart rate tracker on and I was getting some peak heart rate in there. I'll just put it that way. So yeah, great workout, but really it's such an interesting experience, that flow state kind of feeling you get when you're on that wave. It's just in a cool way, it helps clear your mind. So then when I'd get back on the beach, I was in like a really cool Zen like moment where I could just kind of like think. And I was with my wife, and we do an annual anniversary trip. So of course we're always talking about, life and our goals, and are we where we need to be or want to be, and where do we want to be in the future. So yeah, it definitely clears the cobwebs out a little bit, but incredible workout. I've had friends that have done it their whole life, and I get why guys get addicted to it. Ted actually, who's our asset manager's husband, he's a chief firefighter. Like he runs his outpost there, and yeah, that's how he blows off steam in Virginia Beach. Goes surfing almost every morning, kind of thing. So I get it now. It's a lot of fun for sure.
Yeah, no, the ability to focus on one thing, I think, is going to be the major skill set moving forward, is that deep work.
Yeah,
And, surfing is a good example of deep work. My sons, my oldest and my youngest, they're big into soccer, right? And so
yeah.
keep ups is a really big thing for them. And so my youngest, he actually just hit over 200 keep ups. And one way I was training him with that is like, listen, here's the ball, follow it with your eyes. And I was like going up and down and holding the ball up, and see this spot right on the ball, keep focus on this one tiny spot. And so that actually really helped him, and he got over 200. And my oldest, he's actually over 4,000 keep ups now. And
Unbelievable.
so that skill set is what I told him. I said, I think this is going to be the biggest thing you take away from soccer is, these keep ups that you're doing, because you have to focus on one thing at a time. And I mean, that applies to all types of business. I mean, surfing, keep ups, and,
Yeah.
real estate as well.
Yeah, Mark, you had recommended this great book, The Road Less Stupid here by Keith Cunningham, and I had it on the trip and read it. And he talks a lot about that thinking time and that focused work, right? And really sitting down and not just, thinking, right? Like having a strategy to your thought process, like writing down a couple key questions, maybe a day in advance, blocking out that hour of time, and, literally shutting down your computer. I mean, he even says in the book, he has a special chair in his office that doesn't face a window or his computer, and he like puts one hand over his eyes and just like just to kind of keep in that moment, right, and tackle these big questions. And so yeah, it's becoming more challenging, right? We've got social media distractions coming in. Our phones are binging and pinging. You got emails coming in, text messages, alerts. And one tactic, Mark, that I learned a long time ago is I've actually effectively turned off all notifications on my phone, outside of text messages and calls. So I check my email, quite regularly. So I don't need to see, oh, I've got an email there, right? Because it's tempting sometimes, when you're like in the middle of, deep work and you go, oh, I've got an email, right? So I don't even want the notification. I'll check my email when it's time, right? And so that's a great little tactic. Just turn all those notifications off. You don't need to know breaking news when it happens. You can catch up with that stuff later. So definitely a lost art, and an art that I think that, as an entrepreneur, if you're listening to this, if you're not thinking about that and building in that thought process and that thinking time, you're gonna have some challenges. So, take that lesson and apply it in your business, and you won't be sorry for it.
So, John, we're going to be talking about due diligence today and diving into what a lot of operators actually miss. And, through the years, what you and I have both seen, looking after thousands of transactions when it comes to real estate, we've seen a lot. But just before we get started there, if for the listeners, go to fulloutinvesting.com and find out a little bit more about what our process is when we're going in and finding these properties. And then there's also a sample deal there as well. But John, moving forward here on due diligence, what's the overall purpose of due diligence? If we were to kind of summarize it, what are the main parts of that if we were to summarize it?
I mean, I think to put it simply, it's like that look under the hood, right? Before you buy a car, you should take it to a mechanic, a third party mechanic, and have that independent look. Don't just trust what the dealership or the person you're buying from tells you, right? So you're really verifying what the seller and the broker have told us and maybe what they didn't tell us, right? And I'm not meaning to imply like fraud or misrepresentation, but these are big buildings, often with 10, 15 different buildings. And so if you've owned the property for over 7 years, what can sometimes happen? Maybe you own 7 or 8 deals and you're like, oh, yeah, we replaced all the roofs, but actually you're thinking about another deal. And we've had that happen before where we were told a certain percentage of the roofs were replaced. And then our roofing contractor comes out and says none of them have been replaced, right? And so, once again, I'm not saying this is fraud. It's just more, mistakes happen, and sometimes certain information gets lost in the communication, right? So, it's that trust but verify approach. And at the end of the day, we're protecting our capital, primarily our investors' capital. We're personally investing in these deals, right? So we're protecting our capital alongside our investors, and we're making sure our business plan is what we thought it was, right? And we're getting into the due diligence once we're under contract, but we start due diligence on day one, right? And so I think I've shared this story before, but I was on site and I had a broker tour, and the broker had stacked the tours back to back. And so our tour was about 30 minutes. Well, I was there an hour after that tour taking photos and just walking the property. And, it was interesting. I saw two different groups come through, and they were probably there for less than 15 minutes. Now, maybe they just saw it and said it's not for them. But, for us, it's like even before we go under contract or submit that LOI, we want to have a really good understanding of what we're dealing with. So, taking photos of every compressor, looking at the roofs, taking photos where we look like maybe a repair was done. What is this? And we're running this past our construction manager and our property management team even before we submit the LOI. But this is where we're now going, okay, we're going deep. We're bringing out multiple contractors, plumbers, for full plumbing inspections, roofing inspections, general property condition assessments, environmental, and really doing a deep dive on all aspects of the property, right? For example, there was a period of time, in Georgia where it was kind of common practice for builders to just bury building materials on site, right? They had leftover lumber, they just dig a hole and dump it in there. Well, that leads to sinkholes, right, and potential settlement issues. And so that has been banned by law now, but it happened, right? So you can't just assume, you have to go in and verify. And so that's what this process is all about: looking under that hood and ensuring that the facts line up with what we've been told, and we're uncovering any potential deficiencies or deficits that need to be addressed prior to closing.
100%. And so it's really important to know when you're buying multifamily, a lot of people, when they think due diligence or like a property inspection, they think of like physical, which is definitely really important that we get that right. I mean, that the roofs, I mean, is it just the shingles that need to be replaced, or do you have like is there wood rot underneath that roof? So, for example, for physical, are there any structural issues? From we'll say plumbing standpoint and electrical, people think of that when they think of inspection, which is really important. And so we'll talk about that. And then the other part of it that is missed a lot of times, there's two other things. One is like the lease and financial audit. So this is where it's like verifying exactly what John you're saying. It's like what is being advertised, is that what it truly is? And then the third part of it is pretty much like utilities, contracts, and then like the operating expenses as well. Like we want to be able to trust but verify. And so there's really like three aspects to
Yes.
the due diligence that is really important, that you dig into all three of them, because any one of the three can really change the deal significantly.
Absolutely. We start with a property, but what ends up happening is it's actually generally a 2-day process that we're on site when we're doing our due diligence. And that's just for our part of the inspection. Then we have the property condition assessments, environmental and surveys, the third parties, we call them in the industry, that sometimes come a week or two later, just depending on scheduling. But it is a full deep dive into all aspects of the operations. To your point, from contracts, do the leases match up with what's on the rent roll? And sometimes you'd be surprised what you find. I mean, gosh, we've seen situations where they have literally taken a application that was done formally through a piece of software, right, where income is verified, and then we see the property manager just scratch through it and put another income in there. So maybe that person's paying rent on time, so it's not an issue today, but that's when we're going to be watching, and we're going to go back in after we close and get that right information and make sure we have the right data there. So it's a big process. We use up every 30 days generally of our due diligence. Generally, we get 30 days. We ask for 45, but 30 days is enough time. But it's a full 30 days we're using to go through this process to verify every last detail, just to make sure nothing's missed.
Yeah, right on. So if we were going to dive in a little bit more on the property and the physical condition, so this is something that we do order a PCA, so a property condition assessment, and so this is lender required, and so pretty much it's like a home inspection report. Like if you went and bought your home, you get a big report. Well, this report is something that the lender actually requires because I mean, think of it, they are lending on this massive asset. They want to make sure that the property is not going to fall over, right?
Right.
And so that there's that side of it, and then there's the actual walkthroughs. And so I know John in our last acquisition, there was just a property. Maybe you can kind of share what we were able to identify, and then what the plan will be, and the upside with actually walking through 100% of the units, so that we can factor that into our overall game plan when we take the asset versus being surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, some operators, Mark, do a spot audit. They might do 20% of the units. We always insist on 100%. And at our most recent walk, we found a unit where, I'm assuming there was some form of mental illness involved, but the gentleman had a couple of large dogs. He had literally allocated the living room of this unit for those dogs, had it fenced off, and these dogs were quite literally using the bathroom, if you will, in the unit. So that's a huge, huge environmental hazard, right? So that's one we've marked. We actually working with the seller to have them evicted before we even take over.
Mm,
That's an extreme example, but what you also might see are some water spots on the ceiling. So that triggers, okay, roofer needs to really go deep on this building. Is this water intrusion, because of a leaky pipe, or is it because of a roof leak? And what does that roof leak mean? Is that mold? What are these things? Because we take this very seriously. Our residents are our priority. We want to provide the best living experience in the world and go full out for our residents. And so making sure that it's a safe environment for them, right? So 100% of these unit walks is part of our process. We find out a lot, and we also see, maybe some have some upgrades that have already been done that we weren't aware of, so we can refine our budget a little bit. Or maybe units that were advertised as renovated really aren't renovated, right? So it's a constant reworking of our numbers to ensure that it is still the right deal for us as we navigate that. And that property condition assessment is so critical. Now, to your point, the lender requires it, but what we do in addition is we actually bring out our own contractor, our own roof inspectors, our own plumbing inspectors. So we're supplementing that PCA with our own independent vendors to come out to make sure everything matches up, right? The lender's going to require it, but we take it up a notch. So we're looking at all the HVAC systems, all the major mechanicals. So there's red flags out there. Some buildings were built at a time where, say, for example, there were cast iron sewer lines, and those are known to fail. So that means we're going to have to replace those. Maybe it's polybutylene plumbing or aluminum wiring. That's more common in, say, these 70s vintage buildings, which is often why we avoid 70s vintage. We do look at 70s vintage because there's some great opportunities there, and we have some 70s vintage in our portfolio. But it was the right kind of vintage, right? But yeah, walking through, right, we knew that roofs were going to need to be replaced, but what we uncovered is that not only will roofs need to replace, all roofs will need to be replaced, but due to the lack of maintenance on those roofs, the subroofing was also impacted. So it was a little bit more expensive than we were anticipating. So that means we might have to go back to the seller and renegotiate because we were told one thing and we kind of uncovered something else. So it just goes back to, you can't trust the broker's OM. It's not to say they're being deceitful. It's just, people forget. And, there's something called deal merge. You own 20 buildings and you're
yeah.
like, you think maybe it happened, but it was actually, you were thinking about another deal. So It's all about getting our own independent research done so we verify everything. So when we close, we know this is a deal that will
Mm.
still work for our investors.
100%. And so a few other things. So ordering a environmental phase one. So phase one is pretty much a visual inspection that is done to basically identify are there any environmental potential hazards. And so if it's by the gas station and there's like signs that there could be any sort of leakage, then there'll be a phase two that will be requested to be ordered if that is the case. And so generally the lender will accept a phase one. It's like, yeah, everything looks good. But if you're right by, say, a gas station or any sort of potential environmental hazard, that is something that the phase one is will actually identify. So there's that, and then the survey is something that is ordered generally as well. And so this verifies the actual boundaries, any structures or easement. So that identifies that end, which is really good. It's like an easement is pretty much anything under the ground or any like rights of way that'll actually bring forward. Generally, we would know this going in, but again, the survey is something that getting an updated survey is important. And then the maintenance records. So CapEx history, it's really good. It's like if they said that they updated something, we want to make sure, like if they said, we'll say X amount of HVACs, we want to match up what they told us to the what is actually there. And
Yeah,
sometimes that doesn't always match up. So doing your it's kind of you become kind of a detective, so to speak, in this. And so you want to find as much as you can so that at the end of that due diligence period you can make a very educated decision. But John, you nailed it at the beginning before we even submit our offer. Our goal is to be like play detective early. So when we submit the offer, we're not coming back and saying, oh, we didn't know about all this. Like the broker is going to tell us, like, you should have known about this, before you submitted the offer. Why are you waiting now? And so we don't like playing that game later. We like to know everything going up front. And then if we do find something later, it's more so, okay, we couldn't have known about that putting in the offer. And so that really builds really strong relationships with these brokers.
absolutely. That second part of due diligence you mentioned, right? That lease and financial audit equally as important. So we want to look at all leases to make sure that they're fully documented. So the employment history, the criminal background checks, all those things are there. The rent matches up with the rent roll, because we have to trust these financials they send, but if it's not matching up, then that's an adjustment we have to make, right? Are there any fraud, or evictions pending? We don't see a lot of fraud in the areas we buy in. We sort of strategically go to areas that have less fraud, but there are pockets of cities where there's just more of it. And candidly, post pandemic, a lot of that started to happen because people were losing their jobs. And gosh, it's just now it's a sad reality, but you can go online and get like a whole fraud kit. AI is making it very easy to get fake employment records or fake pay stubs. And so we have software that helps run through that. But we just want to see what is the current owner's process. So we need to see what our potential exposure is. For example, on the Charleston portfolio, we knew it because we saw it, but we knew that we were going to have to deal with some evictions based on some faulty, screening that the previous owner did. But because of the way we underwrote the deal, it was something we can absorb and we tackled it immediately, got it right sized. And proud to report, we personally have not had to evict anybody that we've approved and brought into the property. So, not everybody has the same tenant screening qualifications that we do, right? So it doesn't mean it's a bad deal. It just means we don't want to be caught flat footed or surprised down the road. So we need to know that information. We also look for things like, are there short term leases being offered? We only do 12-month leases. So are there month to month tenants? Because if that's the case, one of the first things we do on day one is go to them and renegotiate another annual agreement. We do not do month to month. We also look at their utilities and how they're handling utilities. You'll hear the acronym RUBS, which is ratio utility billing. So what often happens is the entire property is billed for the electric, the water, the sewer, and all those things. And what we often find is some operators just aren't allocating enough back to the residents, right? They're taking on more than they ought to because certainly the property maybe have a pool, they have the leasing center, so there are some water, sewer fees that we should be paying. And municipalities do have rules around how much you can give back, so we have to look at that as well. but we often find a couple $100,000 just in that alone, just because they have not been properly allocating the utilities back to the residents. So we're looking at that. And then we're going all the way down to pet fees, late fees, any deposits, and how they're working. Are they consistently applied? We have a pet fee, for example. So if we took over and we realized there were pets that, because that's part of that 100% unit walk. We see dogs and we go look at their lease and there's no pet fee, right? So we're going to shore that up when we take over the property. I'm a pet owner. I know you're a pet owner too, but pets cause damage, right? They scratch the hardwoods. Sometimes there's odor left behind, and that means that additional expense needs to be dealt with when we turn that unit. So that pet fee helps pay for that. So basically, what's happening is when we're outdoors walking the units, there's two members of our property management team going through that lease audit and going through every leasing file line by line. I mean, that takes just as long as the unit walks. It's a very detailed process.
Yeah. Last but not least here, we got utilities, contracts, operating expenses. So this is like water, gas, electric bills. And so we look over the last 1 to 2 years and we're looking for like, are there certain peaks at certain times? And so pretty much you can have leaks, right? So you can have all of a sudden there's like this big water leak and all of a sudden the bill shot up in a number of the units, right? So we watch for that and how that impacts our numbers moving forward. And so the utility audit as well, I know we were talking a little bit about this, is like this can be massive. You said 100 grand, John, like that's massive. And going back to this whole, for every dollar per month we can save, it's like $240 extra in value, or $100 a month is like $24,000 in value. So if you can save a dollar, that adds $240 to the overall value of the property. And so like, we'll just say we're very motivated detectives when it comes to this, but then also for adding value as well, like trash, laundry, landscaping, like pest control, both on the expense, but then also can we add more? We'll say, does the property support us being able to charge for some of these services? And so this is really, really important that we do that deep dive. I mean, hidden fees. This is a big one. Can you cancel them as well? Like, is there a cable package that we can offer? Wi-Fi package as well. So anything that the seller is not taking maximum effect on, this is something that we're very, very motivated to be able to, we'll say, either add value and to be able to charge where we're not gouging at the same time. And then at the flip side of this, being able to cut expenses that the residents have no idea that is actually it's happening, and it adds no value to the overall operation.
That's right. I mean, a great example is, valet trash, right? So there's multiple companies that offer that service, but because we own multiple buildings, we've negotiated a great contract with one particular company. And so we might look at their contract and see, gosh, they're paying $40 a month and we can get it for $20 a month, right? And so the cable package you mentioned is another great opportunity where, we cut a deal with a local provider like Comcast, and we get a per door fee for every resident who signs up for their cable and internet. So those are all additional income opportunities. Going back to that example, for every dollar, we're creating $240 in value for that building. So very critical part of it, going through every contract and making sure, gosh, we've had situations where we took over a building and they were paying, an exorbitant amount for just landscape maintenance. So we can go out, source 3 additional quotes, and maybe cut that fee in half and still get the same service, right? So that's all part of this process as well.
Yeah, 100%. So once you go through those big three, we'll say, pillars of the due diligence, then you sit with the team and say, okay, let's reassess. Let's take a look at the deal. The good news, John, when we do this, generally we're actually, the deal looks better after we do due diligence.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
this is really, really important. The suggestion here is to be over conservative when you submit your offer, and try not to be too aggressive with, oh, that's only going to cost this. Like, be more conservative, because I'll tell you, John, it is a breath of fresh air. It's like after you do the due diligence and you come back, you're like, oh, we don't need to do this, this, and this. And all of a sudden the deal gets better. So that's a much better position than, oh, the deal doesn't make sense, and now we've got to go back and retrade to
Yes.
be able to make the deal make sense. And so if you go that approach, it actually works out extremely well. And it's just a way better process going through the due diligence.
That's right. And one thing to consider is that with that property condition assessment, there are sometimes lender required repairs. So, in other words, these have to be done prior to closing or within a certain time period after closing. So, making sure that's baked into our plan so we don't end up in default on the loan, or maybe it delays the closing because we weren't able to successfully get the seller to make those repairs the lender required. So, to your point, Mark, we really do our best to not renegotiate. In fact, on every deal we've done so far, we have not had to do that. To your point, generally, we're happier with the deal after our due diligence because of that conservative underwriting approach. But it's not to say if something comes up that's unexpected, we're going to just, lay down and take it. We're going to have that conversation with the seller, particularly if it's something that was not disclosed or shared with us prior to submitting our LOI. So, it's that reassessing the deal just to ensure that it's still the right deal for us. And if so, then we move forward. At Faris Capital Partners, we're big on systems and process. Both of you have, formed other successful businesses in the past. And that's one of the number one lessons. The first is that there's really two: hire great people, but two, have a system and process for everything. So we have a detailed checklist and team accountability wrapped around that checklist. So everybody knows which part of the due diligence process they own and they're responsible for. We have multiple bids done from multiple vendors. So, for example, we have a really great company that we've been working with for a while now on our unit renovations. They do a great job. But every time we do a new deal, partly to keep them honest, but to ensure we're getting the best deal, we go out and we source multiple quotes. And our vendor is aware of that, right? So it just kind of keeps them, on their toes, so to speak. At the end of the day, our goal is to start everything on day one, that 28-day transformation where we tackle not only, a couple unit renovations, but we do the entire exterior as quickly as possible. So any exterior, painting, we're putting in new lighting, new signage, new hardware. Sometimes we're actually enhancing the overall aesthetics of the exterior. For example, on a deal we're looking at now, we'll be replacing some of the columns to modernize it, replacing some of the shutters, but we want that started immediately. So this helps us do that by having a good plan because we know everything we need to know about the property.
So in summary here, John, if you do your due diligence, as you know, if we do this right up front, it saves a whole lot of headache down the road. So by doing your due diligence ahead of time, it does save you a lot. And it's not just about finding problems. It's about verifying reality. It's playing detective and making sure that you're not missing any details, because a detail, especially when you get into larger multifamily, can cost you millions and millions of dollars. And then the other thing too is the best operators, they walk every unit, they question every number, and they don't close unless the overall business plan still works at the end of the day.
That's right.
Thanks for listening, guys. If you are interested in learning more about our process, go to fulloutinvesting.com and you'll see our 10-step full out investing process. There's also a sample deal there as well. We love and believe in you guys. Keep dreaming and investing big.